Welcome to the Frank Forum podcast. My name is Frank Filocomo. I'm the founder and editor of thefrankforum.com, and I'm joined by my good friend, Troy Olson. Troy is the Sergeant at Arms of the New York Young Republican Club and co-author of The Emerging Populist Majority. Troy, there's no two ways about it. You abandoned me last week.
I know.
And I feel that I need an explanation, an apology. What happened to you, and how could you have done this to me?
Well, I thought I'd be back on time. My family, we were visiting Minnesota. That eventually ended in my my daughter's baptism, which we were successful at doing that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, I guess that's
what
valid.
we were not successful. Well, no, but we were going to be on time.
Is that more important than this podcast?
Yes, you got to have family first. But I will say, the real reason I missed the taping was the flights got canceled in every conceivable way and delayed. So
and you took Spirit Airlines, right?
No, American Airlines. I was trying to avoid naming the airline because actually the upfront one, if you were sitting in there for an hour and it's 100 degrees out, it's the first flight out, and you see all like the steam from the air conditioning going around, and then they say something about a mechanical panel. That's actually a plane I'm okay deplaning. Priorities in life. It's like let's deplane. So we deplane, and it kept getting delayed and took us into the next day. And I think I texted you. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to be able to make this taping based on how things are going. And we eventually traveled west to go east. We got out of Sioux Falls. We went to Phoenix, Arizona. I actually wrote a good 3-part on my Instagram with showing the trip and wrote about some of this stuff. So if anyone's interested in our family trip, go check out my Instagram.
I went to Arizona once. I went to Scottsdale in August. And everyone said to me, well, Frank, it's a dry heat and it'll be fine. But I went there, and I remember my glasses felt hot when I would touch them. It was oppressive. But
it was hot.
I want to talk about an organization that we both belong to and what they're trying to do, and that's Braver Angels. Mm-hmm. The New York Young Republican Club went to their convention, and what year was that, 2024?
2024, and the most recent one we did too.
And you and I are both members.
Yep.
And I think that what they're trying to do is very noble. And for those who don't know, this is an effort to take Democrats who wear blue lanyards at the conference and Republicans who obviously wear red lanyards and get them to have sort of civil dialectic, the art of not necessarily persuading, but I would say listening and being empathetic.
Yeah.
I think that, with every passing day, their effort becomes more of an uphill effort. I wonder what you think about this. What do you think of the current state of sort of red versus blue in America?
Yeah, I'm considered a white pill / optimistic person.
Not the Zoomer language, Troy.
Well, sorry. I'm considered an optimistic person about a lot of things, especially over the long run. But I am quite a bit less optimistic about the trends in polarization. I think we are obviously polarized. We're probably more polarized than when their work started, which is no comment on their work.
Which is 2016.
It's a comment on the uphill battle.
Yeah.
My view of how this ends and goes is someone simply just wins overwhelmingly, and the losing side, if you will, for lack of a better term, is hopefully federalism. I think gives us a lot of space for the losing side to carve out a different a way of things to an extent. There will, of course, be exceptions with that. And I also think often about who's going to be more gracious about being the winner, who will be more gracious about being the loser.
Right.
And I have my opinions on that, not especially relevant to our topic today, generally about polarization. I do commend the work Braver Angels has done, and that was a valuable experience every time I've gone to those events.
100%. There's this one study from July of last year, and I think this is alarming. 8 in 10 U.S. adults say that when it comes to important issues facing the country, Republican and Democratic voters not only disagree on plans and policies, but also cannot agree on basic facts.
Yep.
I think that that's entirely right. You have, 8 in 10 Americans that believe that, like I said in another episode, not only are we not reading from the same book, or not only are we not on the same page, we're not reading from the same book.
No, we're not.
And I think, you and I last year did a debate, and was it Park Slope or some super
I thought it was Williamsburg. I thought it was like, yeah, it was
some super blue area where there's Zoran Mamdani signs and windows and things like that.
Although he had not won yet. And at least the vibe in that room, maybe people were being nice to us.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem like a very pro Zoran room. Maybe I just didn't have the right combos though.
Yeah.
But
well, I think that, I mean, to me, that was in many ways, I'm glad we did it, but in many ways it was a sort of depressing event because
I did enjoy it, but I know where you're going.
What we had in effect was, the prompt was, is America over?
Yep.
To which we said, as conservatives who should be prudent and rooted in reality, we said, of course it's not over.
Of course it's not. And we were
ridiculous
and we were going to win the room.
I think so.
We were going to win the room.
But we were painted as MAGA, cult members.
Yeah.
I think. How do you propose we have civil dialogue with people who believe that we are completely brainwashed and pray at the altar of Donald Trump?
I actually really think that most people in that room liked us personally. And I remember some of the feedback on how I think the people that treated us the worst in that room were actually the opposing team and some of the cheap shots that were taken.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I was in deep conversations with a lot of people after we finished that event. I don't know how long you stayed, but I thought it was a really valuable event, and I had similar experiences at other events that I've done and other debates fashioned in a similar way. But there's no denying that Pew result is true. But I want to flip this real quick, because there's another group that does a lot of research similar to Pew, but the UK-based group More in Common, and who I cited in the book a lot.
Right.
And their research shows an 80% too, but flipped the other way. And what they find is that 80% of Americans still generally agree on a value set, which, like free speech and things like that. And so that's maybe just to pull out an encouraging note. And then their other big finding was, the hidden tribes thesis, if you will. Yeah. I disagree with their classification of it, and feel free to dig yourself if you want to find out more what I'm talking about. Because for our purposes of polarization, one flip side of that statistic is I do think 80% of Americans, and there probably is some partisan polarization differences between that, but for the most part, 80%, 83% still agreeing with freedom of expression, freedom of speech is a good thing. That is still something to build from. Although it does seem some days that 17% or whatever is very, very loud.
Yeah. In September, which is next month, it'll be a year since Charlie Kirk was assassinated.
Yep.
I think that in many ways, his assassination exacerbated political divisions in the country.
Yep.
My initial instinct was, and I guess I was naive in retrospect, was that this would be a unifying moment, and that Democrats and Republicans could kind of put all of their policy differences by the wayside and say, you know what, political violence is never the answer. But what I observed in the wake of Charlie Kirk's killing was just the most heinous TikToks, people mocking him, saying that his values were so detestable that he actually deserved to be killed.
Yep.
And that to me was, to use your Gen Z language, that was a black pill.
Yeah.
That was really, really depressing.
Yeah.
What's your take on, kind of post Charlie Kirk's assassination? Do you think that temperatures have calmed down a little bit?
No, they've gotten more extreme, and I think each side of this polarization is itself has internal contradictions that the other side, I think, works with the dissenting side trying to exploit. So I think the greatest amount of bipartisanship these days is when the left works with the dissenting right, aspects of the dissenting right, to try to hurt, and vice versa. Although I can't think of a good version of it flipped. But the biggest white pill, I'm going to stop saying pills. The biggest encouraging sign I'm seeing is there is on the left there is an increasing DSA radicalism going on, and the outcome in the Michigan Senate race, for instance. But then you had was it Joe Biden's press secretary or someone? No, it was Jill Biden's press secretary endorsed Mike Rogers. So I think you're
really,
seeing, yeah.
Oh.
I think
there are lots of, also to that point, there's a lot of X accounts, Democrats for Mike Rogers.
Yeah, I think I'll make a bold claim. I think Dems are going to have a very disappointing midterms. They definitely will not keep the Senate.
That is a very bold claim.
And we don't respond to current events on this format, and it's one of the reasons I don't want to keep to that all the time. The House, I think it's down to a coin flip, but that's kind of how I think things will go. And anyone who knows anything about American government knows that if you just have the House, you're not going to be able to do too much if you don't have both houses of Congress, especially in these really polarized times. So I think the polarization will continue until someone wins overwhelmingly. But as is the thesis from the book I wrote, I think the trend lines are favoring one side over the other. Yeah. And that is the side that's probably going to win overwhelmingly. And it's probably the preferable side to win overwhelmingly, because I do think the consequences of that side losing are much, much greater for the country than the liberal coastal bubbles losing.
Well, you mentioned the DSA, and I actually wrote this on the Frank Forum, where I said that, this is not a political website, nor will it ever be. Right. I don't want it to be a political website. But I think that as an American, as a conservative, as an American, I sort of feel an obligation to speak out against the DSA.
Yeah.
Because they are not just, an ideologically different group. That this is a group that is antithetical to what the framers believed.
Yeah.
And I think that, and we said this before, but they're not reformers, right? I'm totally fine with reformers. Yep. If you have Democrats that have a slightly different version or even a very different version of what we ought to be doing here, that's okay, and that's healthy, and that's called pluralism.
I actually consider myself a reformer.
There
very
you go.
Much so.
But when you have revolutionaries that fundamentally disagree with the whole premise of the country, Daria Lisa, Chevalier, Brad Lander, Al Sayed in Michigan, I think that there's actually an obligation on us as American citizens to speak out against them.
Right. And what's really fascinating is they're revolutionary, but it's very unclear what the end stage goal of what that revolution would be.
What does that look like in practice?
And I think when you're having that rhetoric and language, you have an additional, if you want people to actually buy in and you don't want this to end in complete crazy tragedy, you really have an obligation to describe what the end stage is. And we as best we can tell, we know at least a few of the things are abolition of the Electoral College, the U.S. Senate, and basically that's a different constitutional system.
Private property.
Yep. Yeah. That's a different constitutional system. So we're not talking about a mere, we're not even talking about a mere change of the civic order, as I might call it. We're talking about a totally different society, actually, as what they're arguing for. And so that's why I don't blame you for breaking the rule of this is not a political site to speak that, because I think what we are trying to do here is try to chart a way forward here for us to be a united American country again. Yes. Through civic communitarianism, and which to you is an incredibly local thing. I think it is. I think it just naturally is incredibly local, and it starts there. But I digress. I think that's a proper deviation, and in the spirit of what the site's trying to do in the podcast.
I just finished. Because, I believe that if you're someone who's truly interested in politics or political science, you have to read everything.
Yeah.
Whether it's a leftist writer or a conservative writer. So I just finished reading Senator Chris Murphy's latest book, Crisis of the Common Good.
Okay.
And one thing, he's a thoughtful guy. He's a progressive Democrat, but he is a thoughtful guy. He's spoken about the loneliness epidemic and things like that a lot. Yep. He has good things to say, but one thing he wrote about was groups like American Compass, politicians like J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and the
Groups like
right.
American Compass.
Yes. And so I think that...
What's he got against them?
Well, no, I think that he's actually surprisingly open to a sort of bipartisan consensus around economic populism.
Okay, that's
and
actually
that to me is very interesting.
That's encouraging.
And when J.D. Vance was in the Senate, he did, he had good things to say about Lena Khan and other progressive Democrats. Do you think that there is actually some room for new right Republicans to work with progressive Democrats?
I do, especially around economics.
Yeah.
But I have to note where the progressives, forget about the DSA variety, that's another thing beyond the pale. But just like let's just say you're woke progressive Democrat or whatever that is.
Yeah.
I think they can get more of what they want economically. Mm-hmm. And all they have to do is tamper down the cultural radicalism.
Exactly.
And I think they would get more of what they want. And I think there's also room for them to get more of what they want in foreign affairs and national security as well. They could, but they don't seem to ever end up in that space.
That's it. Well, it's a good point. That's a common criticism from the sort of, doctrinaire Marxist left. Mm-hmm. They believe that identitarianism and social justice or whatever has gotten in the way of their class warfare message. And I think that that's a really interesting point. I went to NYU for grad school, which was just like, to say I was the only conservative. I mean, it was just it's so obvious. I was the only person to the right of Mao, I think.
To the right of Mao.
But there were doctrinaire Marxists in my class that were not happy with how the left was behaving. They didn't believe in all the culture war stuff.
Yeah.
They wanted it to be about class warfare.
Yeah, and I think there is some element to that having kept them from their goals or more progress. I think there are two other things much bigger than that, though, that have kept them from there. I'll cite the one that's been cited since really the start of communism having any momentum about a little bit over 100 years ago now, which is, I think, it's just antithetical to what the human being is, wants, and desires.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard to rewire the human being.
Right.
Their system might be able to work in the Matrix or a computer fictional virtual reality or something, but I don't think it will ever work here in life and civilization and with humanity. The second thing, much further down from that, is I think the American society has been very, very successful at, especially historically, at bringing people into the middle class. I think industrialization itself, which was around the era when Marx wrote, and then in the Europe that would have been growing and percolating. Yes. The industrialization in American life moved a ton of people into the middle class, and it was those new expectations and new accustomed to this new reality that made the 29 crash kind of shake the foundations a bit to where you'd have a rise. But I get that we had a whole progressive reformer era, and that will be credited to it as well. But even before that, industrialization historically was a big mover of making new middle class people.
Absolutely.
And the middle class in tune has been instrumental in holding the civic identity of this nation together. Yes. And so I think the second portion of bringing a bunch of people into the middle class was World War II, and which brings us to earlier I mentioned the stock market crash of 29, and I think the left of center viewpoint is the New Deal saved the American economy, but it didn't. What saved the American economy was World War II. And you could maybe make the argument, oh, that's just 6 New Deals. Okay, bring it back. But I'm someone who thinks the New Deal did not work at all.
Yeah.
In any relevant way. I think if we had Calvin Coolidge just stay president another term, he would have had the confidence and discipline to avoid it entirely.
I was at a few years ago, I was at a book event with Sohrab Ahmari.
Yeah.
Or he was the speaker, and he was plugging his new book, Tyranny, Inc. And it was one of the weirdest things ever. I believe he called himself a New Deal conservative.
Interesting.
And so, you know, I think that it's very obvious to me that there's this new contingent on the right.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes they're called the post-liberal right or whatever they're called.
Right.
And they could actually work with people like Bernie Sanders on economic populism, on tariffs, you know, on industrial policy.
Right.
And so I'm actually, not that I agree with everything that they say, I'm actually kind of hopeful that there are elements of the post-Reagan right that are able to extend an olive branch. I mean, Chris Murphy throughout this book talks about times he worked with J.D. Vance, times he worked with Spencer Cox, who's the governor of Utah. And so I think there is a way forward.
I agree. Did I sound like an anti-New Deal conservative there?
Well, you sounded like a Coolidge fanboy, which is fine. I am too.
I mean, I think the New Deal needs to be looked at in fairness to what it was, what did work. I'm not saying throw it all out. I obviously would like to see Social Security updated for the 21st century. And preserved and saved.
Not sunsetted like Senator Rick Scott wanted it to
I'm
be.
not for that at all. In fact, I'm for expanding it, not in a monetary sense necessarily. It needs to have a fiscal sanity to it. I'm for actually taking it from the individual and expanding it to the family and calling it family security. I think Republicans should actually lead the way with that. Since we are having more families, we should put our 21st century stamp on that and call it the Family Security Act. So then people's personal relationship with that, they no longer think about FDR and the Democrats. They think about families. They think about the Republicans saving it for not just the boomers, but the boomers' children and grandchildren. That is, I think, the task. And I think the Vance philosophy, working with a Chris Murphy or whatever that would be, I think we're far more likely to get to that policy, even if it's not done under Vance, if it's done under whoever it's done under. I think that perspective is far more likely to lead us to that new consensus, and it is a policy consensus. And I think policy wise, I am more optimistic what you're teasing out here, but it's actually the socio-cultural aspect of how we actually talk to one another. That's where I'm like, oh, things do seem worse, because we also referenced earlier, you talked about Charlie Kirk, and it does seem like things are not any better than when you would have first brought this up.
My hope for the Republican Party is that we could tap into what George W. Bush tried to do. Okay, now stay with me. All right, are you staying with me?
I am. Let's hear it.
In the early aughts, when W, as they call him, was president, he tried to launch this kind of movement, compassionate conservatism. And the belief there was that material gain, economic freedom, profit maximization, whatever you want to call it, that was not the end-all, be-all of being a citizen in America. And a large part of citizenship was contingent on spiritual well-being, families, subsidiarity, local communities. I think that, unfortunately, it was just kind of limited to rhetoric, and nothing actually happened with compassionate conservatism. But what I would like to see is for the J.D. Vances and the Marco Rubios, or whomever is part of this new strain of the right, to revive compassionate conservatism. Because I believe, and we spoke about this a little bit offline, that within the average American's heart is actually a conservative disposition. And that is to say that we're not libertarians, we're not rugged individualists. We are people who are hardwired to be attached to families, attached to communities, attached to a lineage. And so that's what I'd like to see for the conservative movement.
I'll make one comment on that. I think so much of what the Bush era could have been it is a what if history, because I also remember compassionate conservatism, but 9/11 happens in his first year. And I really think that derailed whatever he might have planned.
Oh, you're totally right.
For whatever that would have been. And obviously and honestly, that's maybe the truth of all of the last few Republican administrations is we're still figuring out what the true north is going to be in this reform, American renewal. Let's get to a new golden age, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But the only thing we can really come to terms with, because every new administration that has Congress, you get this one big bill, this freebie, and it always just is, I'll just do some tax cuts. That's kind of what we always settle on. And that's why I actually do like the one big beautiful bill was the first to go beyond just tax cuts. Like with Bush, it was tax cuts. With Trump won, it was tax cuts. The one big beautiful bill, yeah, there were some tax cuts in there, but it wasn't the 17 bill. It was actually mostly centered around immigration and the border,
right,
and some other reforms. And there was some family items in there, the Trump accounts. Like there has been, I think we are, if you really take a look at the details of the policies of Trump too, I do think you're seeing a version of that compassionate conservative.
I think so. Child tax credit,
Trump accounts,
and
so I think we're moving closer to that, even if it's not obvious.
There's no question. Yeah, there's no question. I want to leave off on this final thought. I think that going back to the issue of polarization, I think that we need to get better at speaking to each other. And unfortunately, and this is sort of an obvious observation, a lot of what we see in the media stokes our partisan division and just kind of repeats all of these platitudes. And I think about a show, and I really, maybe we'll have him on as a guest one day, but I really think it's the worst show I've ever seen, next to maybe Jersey Shore, is Piers Morgan's show. Yeah. Now, Piers Morgan, I don't know what his politics are. I guess he's sort of a left of center person. His shows are basically relegated to taking the worst exemplars of the left and the right and having them go at it in almost a sort of Jerry Springer type of way. Yeah. And so he'll have some like left-wing Twitch streamer who says insane things, and then he'll have a Nick Fuentes, and they just kind of scream at each other.
He goes on there?
He's been on there.
Okay.
And so I think that is so detrimental to the American experiment.
Agreed.
My preference, and I encourage everyone to check this out if you have the time, other than the frankforum.com, is Two-Way with Mark Halperin.
Oh.
What a service to the country. And his whole mantra of the show is peace, love, and understanding.
Yeah.
No smack in the chat. The presumption of grace to all.
I've got to tell you.
That's the way forward. Troy, last thoughts, and then we're going to wrap it
up. My thought is you actually named the only thing that you could even call media anymore that I watch. I watch Two-Way. I don't know how Mark Halperin votes. I imagine it's lean Democrat slightly.
He seems kind of like a split ticket guy.
Yeah, but he calls balls and strikes pretty well.
I
think he's a fair guy, and the people that he has on, he has access to both worlds, and I think that right there is valuable because so many people in the media, which is obviously very left-leaning, so they're access journalists maybe for their world, but they're not for the right. They don't know anyone on the right. People on the right, rightly so, have shut them out. Why, and why would they give them access? Yep. So the two informational ecosystems, they just reinforce one another. Mark Halperin's Two-Way, which I hope continues to grow, and I love what he's doing, is maybe one of the only things in the media, independent media, of course, that's trying to do it a different way.
Agree.
Love it.
All right, this was fun. Yeah. All right, thanks so much for watching the Frank Forum, and we'll see you next time.